All right, I have 10:30, so I'm going to call the meeting of the New York State Cemetery Board to order. Uh, I'm going to take the opportunity to promote the hope that the eclipse makes everything good and we all get along having a shared experience. Don't know if it's true, but if you say it enough, maybe we'll be. I'm Mark Patterson. I represent Secretary of State Robert Rodriguez. I'm joined by
I'm Tom Fuller, representing Dr. James McDonald for the Department of Health.
and Jill.
And I'm Jill Faber, representing Attorney General Letitia James.
Great, thank you for being here. First order of business is to review and approve the minutes of the last meeting. Does anybody have any corrections or suggestions for the minutes as distributed?
None here.
Okay. I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes of the last meeting as distributed. All in favor? A second that.
Aye.
All in favor, aye. Minutes are approved. Thank you for bearing with me. Rob has mailed out the legislative report. Is there anything to add to that?
Only if anyone has any questions on the legislative report.
I have a
I don't
question.
have any questions.
One on page 4, but I think I'll talk to Lewis offline on that regarding the change to 4201.
Okay.
Rob, maybe you could join. Maybe the two of you could call me when the meeting ends.
Oh, yep. Jill, did you say you have a question or no questions?
No, I don't, no.
Okay. So anything else from council?
Update on rulemaking. The division and I continue to make progress on reviewing the comments received regarding the proposed regulations for natural organic reduction. And I did have one topic for a discussion for the cemetery board. In future rulemakings, I'd like to propose a process that our code council utilizes here. They call it a rule in development. They use it to, it's not required, but it's one way of satisfying the requirements for soliciting and ensuring active participation in the rulemaking process. Essentially, what we would do is, prior to the notice of proposed rulemaking, and for some period of time, we would publish, make available publicly online and listen to comments received on a draft of rules that would then get put into a notice of proposed rulemaking. The virtue of that is by receiving informal comments well ahead of the formal SAPA process, you can sort of cut down and speed up the comment review process later on. It doesn't eliminate it, of course.
So we're not held the same standard, the informal comments, but it's an opportunity for us to get a sense of where our regulations are landing.
Right.
With interested parties.
Mm-hmm. We could hear, informal comments at the board meeting, particularly from stakeholders.
And it's intended to streamline the process, even though it's a step.
Yes.
Okay. I don't know if anybody has objections. I've experienced it at the code council. Seems like a sensible thing to do. They've had good luck with it. I don't know if anybody has any concerns about that as a process.
No concerns.
Great.
Okay, thank you. Nothing further from me on legislation or regulations.
All right. Thank you, Rob. Division report from our Director Louis Polishuk.
Hi. So just trying to pull up the agenda. The first thing I'm going to report on is staffing. As of now, the only vacancy we have is is our Binghamton investigator position. We're seeking to fill that. We're also seeking to add staff. More on that coming up. In a less happy staffing update, Joe Ambrose retired from the division, I want to say January of 2021, but came back part-time, is retiring for real next week. So thank you, Joe. We wish you well in your future endeavors. And other than that, I'm just going to highlight we've got 2 Cemetery 101s coming up, one this Thursday and one next Thursday. Alicia, what's the location on this Thursday again?
That's Cohocton, I think, out west. All the information is on our website.
They're all in our, if you go to our website, dos.ny.gov/cemeteries, the first thing you see is our trainings page where you're going to see that. Oh, excuse me. The following week's training is in, I keep wanting to say Harriman, but I think technically it's Woodbury. It's going to be exit 16 on the thruway at the local firehouse. That's for people in Orange, Putnam, Ulster, Rockland, maybe even Sullivan counties. We're encouraging people to attend. And other than that, that's pretty much what I have. Alicia,
How about the
delegated
27th?
duties? The
April
27th.
27th, Saturday.
Oh, that's an excellent point. Thank you. So we're going to actually be doing press on this shortly. We have, I believe at last, so one of our staff members, Lisa Dooley, is a big fan of the clean up your of I Love My Park Day, which is the first Saturday in May. She rightly asked, why don't we have something like that for cemeteries? So out of that has been born Clean Up Your Cemetery Day. It's coming up soon, April 27th, the last Saturday in April. We are working with a bunch of smaller regulated cemeteries to encourage volunteers to come in and clean it up on that day. We're getting details from them. I believe as of last I checked, we have 22 cemeteries participating. We're going to be doing, I believe we're going to be doing, the department's going to be doing a press release on it and contacting local officials. We will have information about the participating cemeteries on our website, times, locations, contact, and all that, so that, excuse me, people who are interested can come. We're going to also try to have division staff at least stop by as many of these as we can. So several people have generously volunteered to give up their Saturdays to do it. And we think it's going to be cool. We're hoping that this will build for the future years. Hopefully we can have more participants, more involvement, more of a, and just more visibility. I'll say the quiet part out loud. The purpose of this is not just to encourage people to clean up cemeteries, although that's obviously a good thing. It's to let communities know that there are volunteer-run cemeteries in their midst, that they are in fact volunteer-run, and that they need volunteers to do many things, and that they're also kind of a cool local resource. So this is as much about getting people in the door as it is about physically cleaning up the cemetery. All the people are going to be doing really is picking up sticks and raking leaves and maybe picking up uncollected holiday decorations, which seem to always not get picked up at the end of the holidays, probably because winter and snow and all that intervene. So that's like a big thing. We also, going back to Cemetery 101s, we have 2 closer to the end of the month. Those are on our website. Did I miss anything else, Alicia, before we get to the delegated duties report?
I don't think so, other than Brendan Dunn, our senior accountant in Albany, is back. He started with us in December and was on leave for a bit, and is back, and we're happy to have him back.
Yep. So, like I said, the vacancy we've got right now is Binghamton. So, moving right along. Let's talk about the delegated duties report, and I apologize. I'm going to try to pull this up on. This is going to be a little bit complicated, not being in person. I'm sorry about that. I couldn't be there. I'm going to have to try to do this from look at you guys and also look at my document. But I'll just say as background, we've been since the board delegated to us additional duties back in, I want to say 2018, or it was either 2018 or 2019. It was January of one of those years. We've had been reporting to the board on how many of these delegated duties we've accomplished in each quarter, and frankly, we don't think that report's very useful to anyone. So we're trying to give a more meaningful report, including the time it takes for us to process applications. So far this year, we only had columbariums, rules and regulations, and rate applications, of which some were ECI, Employment Cost Index expedited rate applications. The board's got our report, so I'm not going to go through all of the numbers. I'm just going to highlight a few things that wouldn't be apparent from the report itself. For regular rate applications, our target for completing them is 15 days. From reading our report, you would think it is taking us an average of 32 days to process those, with a median of 12 days, meaning, of course, that there were some significant outliers. There are a couple of reasons for this. First of all, our statutory deadlines are way longer than 50 days, depending on the size of 15 days, depending on the size of the cemetery, 60 or 90 days, and we're meeting those. Second of all, our numbers, because we don't really have an easy way to do this as of now, don't take into account, we get an application, we conclude it's incomplete, we ask for more information. Technically, the clock stops and then restarts again when we get the additional information. Actually, we'd probably restart from scratch, but regardless, it doesn't really matter because we never go that long. But we don't really have a way of subtracting that from the processing time, so I think it's inflated and the numbers look longer in that respect. The other thing I'll call attention to, and this is true for ECI as well, this is true, by the way, for ECI rate applications as well, is that we've got a lot of new staff that have started, and former staff, let's just say they had a way of doing things that current staff have taken a look at the statutes and regulations and said, hey, you know what? There's this, that, and the other thing that you really need to be doing with these applications that we haven't been getting, and have been asking for those things. So it's not so much a learning curve as coming more strictly into compliance with what was required all along. And I think the cemeteries understandably weren't prepared to submit things that we'd never bothered them for in the past, and are now getting used to that. So I think that to that extent, to the extent that's lengthening our process, that should self-adjust. It's already beginning to self-adjust, and certainly by next year it should self-adjust. We've also had a couple of rate applications that have been kind of complicated and caused by current factors. I know we had one where we spent a lot of time going back and forth on credit card charges that ultimately was withdrawn and will be resubmitted in different form in the fall because of the new law creating some complexity for that. Turning to the rules and regulations, I think our numbers will need a little bit of refining on this for two reasons. Number one, somewhat like the rate applications, basically what happened is we got one application on rules and regs in early January, and staff and I started reading it, and we found things in the previously approved rules and regulations that, shall we say, had questions about, which caused me to suggest that at least on some of the rules and regs applications, we really ought to take a deep dive into them, not just at the changes, but at the previous rules, and making sure we don't have any serious questions about those. We've been doing that. It slowed us down a bit, but I think the product's going to be better at the end. We've shared those with most of the cemeteries where that happened. I'm not sure that there's one where I think we may not have gotten it out to them just yet, but we will soon. And that's slowed us down. But the other thing is, I think investigative staff have been inconsistent about updating the database when we've approved these. I will freely admit I am one of the people who has been inconsistent about that. And we're working on getting more consistent on that point, which will give us better data on how quickly we're getting these done. So again, we as a division have not really been focused on quantity and these kind of metrics. Our approach has always been much more qualitative in nature, and I'm not saying that's changing, but I think we're trying to make a better effort to be able to measure how we're doing things and report this to you guys, the board, and the outside world. So that was a very long-winded background explanation for a very short report that Alicia prepared. excuse me, I'll probably have better data for you on, we're gonna try to have better data for you on rules and regs for the May meeting. Failing that, we'll have a more complete report for the second quarter. By the way, one last thing, we did not try to go back and calculate things for previous months and years. This focuses slowly on the first quarter of calendar year 24.
Okay,
That's all I have on that. Alicia, do you have anything you wanted to, that I missed?
I think you covered it.
yeah, I mean, the board, is that posted anywhere, is that delegated
I circulated it to y'all.
to us, but is the?
Yeah, it's not, it wasn't, it was so late yesterday, I didn't
Okay.
post
Yeah,
it online. I can
we
do
will
that.
add that. For now, we're gonna add that to the materials for this meeting. Because we just didn't get it to them in time because we didn't get it done until like yesterday.
So I'm just gonna make, just, since it went out late, it just, we can bring it up again next month if the board has.
It's not really an agenda
Sure, and
item,
I
it's
think-
just information.
My
I
point,
think that's wrong, Louis. These are duties that the board holds, the duties of the board, which we've made a decision to delegate for purposes of efficiency and timeliness to the division. But this, you're reporting so that we can
right,
assess whether that's working or not.
so,
And I invite the board and the public to advise us in places where they think that it might not be working.
Right.
So again, it's just not informational in my view. It's an important function of the board to assess its delegation of duties.
okay, having seen the first one of this nature, is there any information you would like to see in addition to what we
That's
were
a,
presenting
that's a great question. And again, I think that since it just came out yesterday, let's not put the board in that position.
Okay,
Let's ask the board to review them. Again, I thought it was fine. I didn't see anything in particular, but let's give the board till the next meeting. We can review it at our meeting at NISAC, and that'd be an interesting discussion to have. And again, our next meeting is at NISAC, and so we'll have an opportunity to have in-person discussions with cemeterians as well.
Given that we didn't post it, and given that I think we're pretty sure there's data that we were missing that would affect at least the rules and regulations piece of this, my suggestion is what we'll do is we're going to do a revision of this report, still focusing on the first quarter, and present a revised report, hopefully with better information on the rules and regulations, to the board for the May meeting, and we'll get that posted well in advance so everybody has adequate opportunity to comment.
Okay, any board members have any?
We're not gonna update it to include April. But we will back in and get the, any stuff we were missing in the first quarter, especially on the rules and regs.
All right,
in
you're
time for that.
filling up a lot of air. I want to make sure the board has any questions about what we're doing right now, and again, the purpose of the report. Okay, so thank you, Louis. Is there any other things to report on the division?
No, that's all.
Okay. Alicia, is there anything else that we have to report for the division?
the vandalism report.
All right. I thought you
So
might want
this
to
is-
remind
so
Louis
this is-
again. of
Did you
things.
do numbers on annual reports received and all that?
I don't have that.
Okay.
They were coming in fast and furiously last week, though. So the vandalism, so this is the final for the 23-24 fiscal year. We ended up spending about $1.7 million. Payments that I know went out the door was 1.4, and then an additional 2.2 went, or 227,000 went upstairs and is in the queue for processing. So I get a report back from fiscal every month. It lists what we sent up there, what they've approved and has been sent out for payment, but they have not gotten a report back saying, this is the check number, this is the date it was exactly paid.
Yeah.
So that's the $227,000 it's been approved by them, sent along before March 31st, so hopefully
Okay.
that'll hit for last year's bill.
Okay.
As far as what we approved for the whole year was a little over $2 million. And with what's still outstanding, what's in the queue, what's on the agenda for this month, and the $2 million appropriation for the 24-25 year, we only have about $358,000 left to spend this year if everything else gets paid out of this year's appropriation.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Well,
I think,
it's all timing difference, though.
I know.
right, part of what happened this year is we had a bunch of, for some reason, we had a bunch of hazardous monument applications where the cemeteries ran legal notices that didn't comply with the statute, and they had to rerun them. So that effectively pushed the whole category of the whole group of hazardous monument applications from one year into the next year, which probably means we have, which is probably a significant part of why we have more money tied up for this year already, because it's not only this year's applications, it's last year's applications as well.
And
Sure.
some from prior years for that.
I mean, there's some that's kicking around from years and years ago.
Unfortunately, yeah. So,
Well, we should talk about that. Okay, and
this month we've got 3 applications totaling $144,521.21.
okay. All right, why don't we talk about the vandalism, anything else, Lucia,
Nope.
we've mailed report? We have, I don't have it in my printed, Boston Spa.
No,
That's
that's not.
no vandalism reports. Okay, we do have sorry, I didn't have the update. So the first vandalism application is from Poolville Cemetery in Madison County in the amount of $28,075. Someone will present that to the board.
This is Mike Seelman from the division. Poolville Cemetery is a small cemetery in the town of Hamilton, Madison County. They put in an application for repair of 29 monuments. I visited the cemetery and all 29 appeared to pose a hazard. Most recent of these monuments is dated 1920, and they do not have records that go back that far. They ran a legal notice, once a week for 3 weeks in the Sherburne News, and they received no response from that legal notice. So it's the division's understanding that the cemetery has determined that the lot owners cannot be located. They provided 2 estimates for these repairs, one from Barnett Memorials for $27,787, and one from Northeast Cemetery Services for $38,500. Both estimates were to replace these monuments reset these monuments on new foundations poured to the depth of 42 inches and sealed with a 10-year warranty. The average price for the lower bid, the one that we recommend approval, is $958 per monument. Poolville Cemetery is up to date on vandalism payments and annual reports, and we recommend approval in the amount of $28,075.
Does anybody have any questions of Mike on the application?
No.
Okay, I'll make a motion to approve the application for Poolville Cemetery in Madison County in the amount of $28,075, subject to availability of funds.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Application is approved. Elk Creek Cemetery in Otsego County in the amount of $26,975.76.
This is Mike Seelman again. Elk Creek's a small cemetery in the town of Maryland, Otsego County. They submitted an application for 36 monuments. And when I had, this was an application that was begun by Investigator Stanton. And I completed it. I went out and looked at the cemetery and determined that 34 of the monuments did appear hazardous. Two monuments, the Thomas Holdridge and the Caroline Becker monuments were smaller monuments and were down and did not appear to be posing a hazard. I notified the cemetery that those two monuments would not be included and adjusted the estimates. The most recent monument included was from 1960, and the cemetery does not have records that go back that far as lot owners. They did run a notice, however, in the Daily Star once a week for 3 weeks, and they received a response to that ad. It's the division's understanding that the cemetery is determined that the lot owners cannot be located. They provided a repair estimate from Northeast Cemetery Services for $26,800 and a repair estimate from Humphrey Memorials for $57,630. Both estimates were for resetting these monuments on concrete foundations to the depth of 42 inches and included a 10-year warranty. The cemetery is up to date on their annual reports and their vandalism payments, and we recommend approval in the amount of $26,975.76.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions about this application? Let me ask council here.
I'm just curious why Humphrey Memorials is more than double on their estimate for the same work. Any sense of?
I did discuss that with the president, and they did not have a reason for that. They did not know. They're not excessively large monuments. I don't have an explanation for that.
By way of background, it's worth mentioning that places are just having a heck of a time finding two bidders. In some cases, they're only getting one bid at all. So, yeah, it's weird that Humphrey was out of line, but it's better than having no competing bid. You know, if we had said to them, go try to find a third bid that's more in line, they might not have found anyone even willing to submit.
I will say that the Northeast, the lower bid average price is $788 per monument.
That's below
And
average.
that is on the low end. And the Humphrey estimate is $1,695, which is a bit on the high end.
Well, it's not, Mike, that's not super high, is it?
Not super high, no, but that 788 is pretty low.
No, my point being, the Humphrey number is much higher, but it's not crazy with respect to what we see across the state. It's high, but not like completely outlandish.
I agree with that.
That's good clarification, I think.
Right, yeah, and, you know, I noticed on the next
Good question,
application, they're the low bidders, so
Yeah.
it just seems like the numbers are kind of all over the place.
And just as a reminder, sorry, Tom, I didn't mean to cut you off. Just as a reminder, and Rob, jump in if I misspeak. We don't approve bids per se. We use the bids as a budget for how much money we're going to appropriate from our funds to the cemetery. But it's really, once they get that money, they're free to contract with whoever they want. We're just not going to give them more money unless they have a reason to and they come back to the board to seek to amend their application.
I mean, I would generally agree with that outside of related party transactions where the board is looking at the identity of the proposed contractor.
That's fair. And same with if they're doing their own work.
You say whoever they want, but and it's not restricted to the two, but it is sort of expected that it's one of the people that's provided a price, right?
I put it this way, I've never seen somebody submit two bids and then go with somebody else altogether.
Yeah, I
There
think
have been one or two cases where the cemetery has chosen to go with a higher bidder, not because they were a related party, but because they trusted them more. They were willing, either in one or two of those cases, they persuaded us to pay the higher amount. In one or two of those cases, they went out of pocket and paid the difference.
Sure. Again, I think it's the given context is the more accurate description. Did we vote on that?
I don't think so.
So if there's no further discussion, I'll make a motion to approve the application from Elk Creek Cemetery in Otsego County in the amount of $26,975.76. Do I have a second? Subject to availability of funds.
I'll second.
Any other discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Motion
Aye.
carries. Last vandalism application, dangerous monuments, to Lakewood Cemetery in Otsego County in the amount of $89,470.45. I'm assuming that's Mike again.
This was Investigator Stanton's application, who actually did the site visit. But I finished it up. Lakewood is a medium-sized cemetery in the town of Middlefield. They submitted an application for repair of 38 hazardous monuments. Investigator Stanton visited and confirmed that the 38 monuments appeared hazardous. The most recent one is dated 1926, and the cemetery does not have records going back that far. They put the legal notice in the Daily Star, and they received no response from that. It's the division's understanding the cemetery is determined the lot owners cannot be located. The cemetery provided repair estimates from Humphrey Memorials for $89,300 and McPhee Memorials for $98,650. Both of these estimates were to put in 42-inch foundations, reset the monuments on those new foundations, and provide a 10-year warranty. The average price of the lower bid in this case is $2,350, which is quite a bit higher than what we saw in the last application. So when the application originally came in, Investigator Stanton requested additional bids, and the cemetery attempted to solicit bids from 3 more contractors, and people refused to bid it. And the reason primarily is that Lakewood Cemetery has very difficult access. It's on a hillside. It's very wooded. It is a lot of terraced lots cut into the hillside with very narrow roads. And many of these monuments are quite large. So based on the efforts of the cemetery to get additional bids, we're comfortable with the 2 bids that we have. The cemetery is up to date on their annual reports and their vandalism payments, and we recommend approval in this case in the amount of $89,470.45.
Any questions from the board on that? It's it is interesting.
I have a question. Is, the factors that you identified that make it, more difficult to do the repairs, and so the repair costs are higher, does that seem consistent in your experience with other similar conditions in other cemeteries? I guess just for a comparison, have you seen prices like this in situations that present similar logistical circumstances?
I have.
Okay.
We've had cases where once a monument gets so large, it becomes, obviously, the larger the monument, the more costly it is to repair it.
Mhm.
However, some contractors have specialized equipment to handle large monuments, and they can actually do it at a lower rate than someone that would, say, have to rent a piece of equipment for a time period. I have visited this particular cemetery, and I can attest to difficulty to access it with large equipment, because, like I said, there are terraced hillsides with these family lots, and Brendan Stanton and I were there, I think, a year and a half ago, looking at other work that had been done, and we both commented on how difficult it must be to get equipment in there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I was about to say just something similar, which is just interesting to see the comparisons. And it's interesting for us as a board to sort of, you know, understand and be part of the due diligence and appreciate this, the division's work in making sure that we've got the information we need. So thank you. Thank you for that.
I think we have, as a whole, been paying more attention. I'm not saying we didn't do this in the past, but we really are looking at average, comparing bids to average prices with every application, even where it's not one that raises any questions.
Yeah,
Just to
yeah,
get a better
that's
handle on the market.
it's important. It's state funds, and we want to make sure that cemeteries are accessing the fund, but also doing it wisely. So I think I just think it's an important process for the board and important work on the division side. So I'll make a motion, if there's no other discussion, to approve the application of Lakewood Cemetery for dangerous monument repair in Otsego County in the amount of $89,470.45. Do I have a second?
Subject to the availability.
Subject, you got a lien. Subject to the availability fund, sorry.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion is approved, application approved. We have two other pieces of business, Dolgeville Cemetery, determination of abandonment.
Mike, this is like all you all the time today.
Yeah, it is. So Dolgeville Cemetery is a 18.9 acre cemetery. It's located in the village of Dolgeville, which is in the town of Manheim in Herkimer County. It has been operated by a board of 7 volunteers who not only conduct the typical day-to-day board business, but a few of them are actually providing the mowing and the maintenance as volunteers. Because of this, they were able to operate the cemetery very efficiently because they're not paying a contractor to cut grass. They're not paying employees to cut grass. But they've come to the point where the people that were providing all of this volunteer labor don't feel that they can continue doing this. So they called us in June of 2023 to let us know that they were kind of having a crisis and wanted to see where they would go with they wanted to make sure that the cemetery, you know, was maintained and operated properly, but they just were to the point where they'd done it for years and years and they couldn't continue. So we scheduled a meeting in June. I met with the members of the board and members of there was a Manheim town supervisor and some members of the board, the town board. And we discussed the issues that were facing the cemetery, and the division accountant had prepared what we used to call an end-of-life calculation to look at the available funds. And we determined that if the cemetery were to hire contractors to provide the work that these volunteers were providing, they would last for 0.93 years, so just less than a year. So this information was given to the town. We discussed it. We looked at possibly merging with another cemetery in the area, but there was no candidates for that. All the board members and the town board members were instructed to try to look for new volunteers that could help this cemetery. And then they scheduled a meeting for a lot owners meeting for October of that year. They had that meeting at the town office, and they were not able to get new lot owner or new board members. So they discussed what their options were and decided that the existing board would likely resign. And they did that. They kind of post-dated their resignation to December 27th of 2023 and notified the town and notified us. We've looked at what the cemetery has now, a total of $102,041, but only $19,043 of that was unrestricted. The cemetery has, I think there's 2 acres that are undeveloped at this point, but most of the cemetery is developed and sold. They've turned over any equipment that they have, and the town had been storing the cemetery records, including the laptop and the files. So that's already secure with the town. And so the divisions determined that because they don't have enough unrestricted funds to operate the cemetery and provide maintenance, and because the board resigned effectively December 27th, that Dolgeville Cemetery is abandoned under the definition of abandonment in Town Law 291. So what we did was we drafted the termination letter, and I believe that letter went out to the town. Is that correct, Louis?
Yes, I mailed that out last week.
And there we have.
And I'm not sure if anyone's here from the town. I'm not recognizing anyone here if they are. Not that that would mean anything.
I don't recognize any names. I spoke to the attorney for the town and the town supervisor regarding this, but I don't see them.
So they know it's coming.
And they know they can apply for abandonment funds?
They have not, yes, they were notified of that possibility, but we didn't make that a part of this determination. But they definitely know, and we'll follow up with them.
Great.
And just to be clear, the conversations that were had at both of the meetings that we had with the town were not that the town wanted to take the cemetery over. They weren't eager to do it. However, they understood what their obligation would be if the cemetery were abandoned.
Any discussion or comments on this action? Anybody wishing to speak to the board about it in terms of the action? All right, well, it sounds like a yeoman's effort to try to get it to continue as a not-for-profit cemetery, which is certainly our goal. And it sounds like the town understands its obligations, and hopefully we can be helpful to them with the abandonment fund, or the vandalism fund. What do we do here, Rob? Do we just accept it, or?
So the language of our reg 202.5 subdivision C is that the board shall either confirm or reverse the determination of the division, or may seek additional information. So the ask here is that the board confirm the division's determination that the cemetery is abandoned pursuant to town law section 291.
Okay. I'll make that motion as Rob read it for the purpose of putting it on the table. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
And is there further discussion from the board on this matter?
Nobody from the town?
Doesn't sound like it. Nobody from the town, nobody from the cemetery. I guess it's worth saying that I want to, we appreciate the volunteer work that the previous board members provided. Kept the cemetery going probably longer than otherwise expected. And, we're grateful for their contributions as well. So all in favor, confirming the determination? Sounds like the motion is approved. Last piece of business is Green Lawn Cemetery, a Nunk-Pro-Tunk Mausoleum.
Guess who's going to present?
It's me again, Mike Field. Green Lawn Cemetery is a medium-sized cemetery. They're in the town of Warner in Onondaga County. In 2020, they submitted a letter notifying us that they had intended to build a mausoleum. And the letter was not a complete application. And I had some back and forth with the superintendent of the cemetery at that time. And unfortunately, the application was never completed. The glaring issue was the lack of signage at the cemetery. We have a very specific requirement that they post signs at all entrances, at the office, and at the location of the proposed mausoleum, and that they include information regarding the deadline for contacting the cemetery with questions or concerns about the mausoleum, and they had not done that. And I had some back and forth with them over the next 2 years to try to get them to complete that application. And it ended up in October of 2021, they built the mausoleum. So we issued a notice of noncompliance. We got a response that basically said that they were sorry that they had done this without approval and they would seek approval in the future. And then we waited for that approval and we finally got that application to build this. So basically it's a 64 crypt garden mausoleum. The cemetery has 5 other garden type mausoleums. They're very popular in this area. At the time that they applied, initially, I think they had 2 spaces left. And since they've built this in 2021, they've actually sold 12 spaces. The total cost of this building was $175,640. All that money came from the general fund of the cemetery. I should note that money has already been recouped from sales. And we received, like I said, the completed application. We also received a set of stamped plans from Cold Springs Granite, who is the manufacturer of this mausoleum. And so the dealings with the cemetery have been positive in that they've come forward with this application. They fully understand the signage requirements, and we have a good working relationship where I feel that if they build another mausoleum, they're going to make sure that they're in compliance and they have an approval prior to doing so. So we've recommended approval after the fact of this 64 crypt mausoleum.
Okay,
Rob, before you give your background, just want to sort of put attention for situations like this. We've had a couple recently where previous people did things that weren't in compliance, and the new people understand they're not supposed to do that, and have been attentive to the issues in question. In those cases where we have proposed a penalty, we've recommended in lieu of a penalty that the cemetery simply voluntarily restrict some of its own money, transferring it to general fund to permanent maintenance. So they do feel a little bit of a pinch on their end, but it benefits them and doesn't end up going to the state.
And in this case?
In this case, we haven't actually even proposed a penalty yet. We have not made a final decision as to recommendations on that. But we want to get this thing finally legitimated and are going to further discuss what, if anything, is appropriate to do here. I mean, they've come into compliance. The question is, should there be an additional restriction of funds or not? We just haven't had that discussion yet.
Okay.
But they're already selling spaces here, and we need to get it legit. And it's a good.
It's an open item. Rob, you have something to add here?
A couple of things. First, my understanding is that the mausoleum is less than 4,000 square feet. So as a commercial structure of less than 4,000 square feet, would qualify as a type 2 for the purposes of seeker. Qualifying as a type 2 ends the seeker analysis. Second, as Louis alluded to, there are, of course, other options available to the board rather than approving it not pro tunc. One, would be to impose a fine following an adjudicatory hearing of up to $1,000. The other would be to direct the cemetery to come into compliance with the article, which could mean removing the structure itself. And then just to add on to Lewis's recitation about other types of things we've done in lieu of imposing a fine, I believe at times we've also made available to cemeteries the future dates for Cemetery 101s to make sure that they know the rules of the road.
Any other discussion?
I just have a question. I have a question. So I guess I'm wondering, based on these specific facts, it sounds like the board at some point before this was built was advised, knew, acknowledged that they needed to apply and get approval, and said, like, we're going to do it. But they didn't, and they went forward anyway. And I guess I'm wondering if that in any way distinguishes it from a situation where, the cemetery didn't realize that they needed to get approval for that kind of thing. It seems like they acknowledged before it was actually done that they needed to get approval, and we had good faith that they were going to do that, and they didn't. Is that not right?
Yeah, the cemetery, or excuse me, the Green Lawn Cemetery Board met, discussed the need for a new mausoleum, and they instructed the superintendent to contact the division to start the process of getting approval. That is in the minutes that are included in this application.
Right.
All correspondence after that was between the division and the superintendent. And that superintendent's no longer there, so I can't ask if the board was notified of this before the final build or anything like that. I didn't have that opportunity.
I think that's to my mind, that's really critical in how we issue an approval. I think that's critical to know some more information about what transpired once that conversation with the superintendent and board happened and memorialized. Why wasn't an application filed?
So you're
Is that just
suggesting,
the cemetery on, talk about that?
So could I make a suggestion? I think there is somebody on from the cemetery, so I'll hold my peace unless they have something to say. But I do have something to say.
that someone from the cemetery would
Yes,
address the board?
I'm here. My name is Cheryl Lancello. I'm the acting administrator for the cemetery right now. To my knowledge, the board was encouraged by the superintendent that we needed a future mausoleum. When the application was made, it was understood that the application would be a letter. And then it came to pass that it was a different application. At that point, we had already started the construction. I have nothing more to say about that. That was the timeline.
I mean, so we really have to hear from the board as to whether this was more in the nature of a failure to supervise the previous superintendent, or whether they affirmatively were aware that the superintendent had not actually done a completed application. What I would suggest, given that this thing is out there and they're already selling on it, is I think that the board can go ahead and approve it now. If you like, we can, before we propose corrective, it would propose a penalty of some type, we can come back with a recommendation to the board by next month as to what we think is appropriate. We could also, if the board is okay with it, have an initial conversation with the cemetery as to whether to what extent they'd be mutually agreeable to said proposed penalty. or we could wait to do that until after we presented it to the board. I'm okay either way. But you know, they need the space. It's a good project. We would have approved it. They did ultimately post the signs. They did not get any, the thing is built. They've never had any negative reaction. So whether it's important that they be able to continue selling, and the best way for them to do that is for us to be retroactively approve it, bracketing the concept of an appropriate penalty.
I think the
That makes
board,
sense to the board.
I did talk to the board about this and the potential of a penalty. So they're well aware that there could be one imposed.
Really great, thank you.
I don't know, I don't know if that satisfies Jill, the,
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. I think as a threshold matter, for all the reasons that you articulated, it would make sense for us to just consider approving it, giving a non-proton approval. But I would like to hold off and have a discussion of the board around, you know, around a penalty.
I think to do that effectively, you're probably going to want some more facts from us as to exactly what the cemetery's board itself knew and when it knew it, which we can get.
Okay.
yeah, I would just add generically that, you know, getting funds from the state means that you have to wind your way through our bureaucracy. But our bureaucracy, for better or worse, is, you know, based on things that need to be done. There's reasons behind the rules. Not, you know, so it's not just willy-nilly that we put things in place to make it, quote, harder for cemeteries to apply. You know, there's a tension there. And I really hate it when we're in a position where we're looking at penalties, which may not be in the long-term interest of the cemetery, but we also have to make sure that people understand the rules are there and need to be followed. So that's, I mean, that's just the nature of the, you know, business with the state. So again, I said that generically, not necessarily specifically to the cemetery, because I don't know all the facts. But so there's a motion. I'll make a motion to approve the non-pro-tunc application
To construct a mausoleum.
to construct a mausoleum with the caveat that the division bring back to the board additional information about the process that was followed and recommendations for further action. A second?
I'll second that.
Any more discussion in that regard? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Application is approved, not pro-tunc. And thank you for the acting administrator for being on and giving us some information. The next cemetery board meeting is good for May 8th at Crown Plaza in Albany, is that right?
Correct.
So,
Flagging for everyone that that's a Wednesday, not a Tuesday.
okay, and then Crown Plaza is formerly the Desmond, just so you can make sure you go to downtown Albany. And we will have our meeting of the board. It'll be a formal meeting, as we always do in public, but there'll be an opportunity to have discussions with the conference members, cemetery, thank NISAC for always inviting us to that. Is there anything else that we need to do? We didn't have public comment. Just so I'll ask if there's anybody online who would like to address the board on matters that we've discussed today or other matters that could be done before the board. Hearing none, is there anybody else present who'd like to address the board?
Sure, David Fleming from the New York State Association of Cemeteries. Just a couple of quick things. Thanks to council for the recommendation on the rules development process, and NISAC looks forward to doing that. I think some of the best rules that have been created by the cemetery board in my tenure with the association have been ones where we work together and come up with really good public policy, so we certainly welcome that. Thanks to the board also for getting into a discussion on the monument bids. It's becoming, as we've talked about at previous meetings, extremely difficult to get multiple bids around the state from folks for these applications. There are less and less people doing the work, and it's becoming quite difficult. And we're frequently seeing, as the discussion touched on, many of these really old, larger monuments are very difficult to repair, and you need specialized folks with lifts that can pick up these large monuments, and so it even further reduces the number of people who are willing to bid on the work. And then also just on the abandonment piece, and thanks to the division for all the work that they've been doing on preventing abandonment with the new regs. I would just request that division staff, when they're counseling these boards who are deciding that they're going to be resigning, that they not do that as quickly as some of them would like to. Encourage them to not do that, because there is a process through 291 of the town law where towns are taking over these properties, that they want to make sure that they have title to land for any development and upkeep and for insurance purposes. So NISAC's happy to be a resource in that regard and to talk with municipalities as they're facing the takeover of abandonment. And finally, just thanks again to the board for participating in the May conference. We always enjoy having you there, and I think it's very helpful for our members to meet with our regulators. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Anybody else wishing to address the board? I'm going to say that next time the division asks for more investigator staff, I'm going to say no, because apparently Mike Seelman's all we need. Thank you, Mike, for your work.
Can I ask, Mr. Fleming, a question? You raise a really good point. Does NISAC have any guidance that they provide to cemeteries that boards might be able to use in that process, so that they have some clear parameters, and maybe the division can also employ that guidance, so that they're all getting the same instructions?
That's an excellent question. In fact, working with the Tug Hill Plateau Commission, we've created a white paper on abandonment for municipalities to outline some of the things they need to do. And we receive a number of calls throughout the year based on that information. And not everyone has been aware of it. So there are some, blips, and the divisions experience problems where folks just decide to go ahead with their own abandonment process and ignore the division or, 291 of the town law, which always leads to problems. So we encourage folks to follow the process.
Yeah, that sounds like a good collaboration, because consistency in this context is very important.
Yes.
Our regulations are designed to prevent the situation that we've seen where we find out 3 years later that a cemetery was abandoned and the town has taken it over. But yes, having an orderly process for the abandonment guidance that we'd love to take a look at.
Well, again, I think Cemetery 101's is a significant effort on our part to bring knowledge, education, information to the cemeterians so that they can access resources and know what the process is and follow the process. Because again, generally speaking, the process, well, sometimes bureaucratic is important. So, okay. So anything else? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn the New York State Cemetery meeting today. Second?
I'll second.
All in favor? Aye, means adjourned. Thank you all for attending.